All right, class, let's talk about Jewish perspectives on war. So as usual, we will do our overview, and then we'll talk about the teachings of Deuteronomy 20. You'll then analyze some rabbinic commentary on Deuteronomy 20, and then we will end with a conclusion. So perhaps the most influential teachings on war in the Jewish tradition come from chapter 20 of the book of Deuteronomy. And as a reminder, the book of Deuteronomy is the fifth book in the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Tanakh or Hebrew Bible. And according to Jewish tradition, these teachings on war were given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai, providing the guidelines for the Israelites to follow as they entered the land of Canaan. So, just to kind of review the context, so for those of you who went to Sunday or Hebrew school, this may ring a bell. So according to the book of Exodus, at one point in the ancient world, the Israelites were enslaved by the Egyptians. But they were eventually delivered out of Egypt by the patriarch Moses. They traveled in the wilderness, and the law was delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai. And then the Israelites enter the land of Canaan because this is the land that has been given to them by God according to the Torah. Now, entering the land of Canaan would inevitably lead to military conflict because the inhabitants of this land would regard the Israelites as invaders. So Deuteronomy 20 contains rules of war that are to be followed by the Israelites as they prepare for battle. Now, in preparation for this lecture, you were to read the selection from Deuteronomy 20 on iLearn. So now we're just going to highlight some of the major teachings that you read about. So to begin with, Deuteronomy 20 opens with the following teaching. Some men in the army are exempt from battle. And who are exempt from battle? Those who just built a house, those who just planted a vineyard, those who are recently married, and those who are afraid and disheartened. So as they enter the land of Canaan and they are about to prepare for battle, the priests are basically to ask, who in the ranks have just built a house or planted a vineyard, just gotten married, and the battle becomes optional for them. Secondly, before laying siege to a town or city, terms of peace should always be offered first. So if the people of the town or city surrender peacefully, they shall serve the Israelites as forced labor. So again, terms of peace should first be offered before laying siege to a town or city. Third, if the town or city does not surrender, the army is to kill all of the men, but you may, however, take as your booty the women, the children, livestock, and everything else in the town, all its spoil. And with respect to the towns and cities that the Israelites are to occupy, the population needs to be annihilated. Okay, why? Well, according to the book of Deuteronomy, so that they may not teach you to do all the abhorrent things that they do for their gods, and thus sin against the Lord your God. So rule 3 is with respect to cities or towns that the ancient Israelites are not to occupy. They're just kind of doing battle on the way to the areas that they are to occupy. But in this respect, in the towns and cities that the Israelites are to occupy after the battle, the entire population needs to be annihilated because they are considered to be like a bad influence upon the ancient Israelites. And then Deuteronomy 20 ends with a rather interesting teaching. It says here that the Israelites are not to cut down any of the fruit-bearing trees in the area where war is being waged. So this is kind of like a teaching against what we call like total war, or like scorched earth warfare, where armies are just to destroy every living thing, in enemy territory. In the case of Deuteronomy 20, it says, no, you are to leave the fruit-bearing trees alone. Now, in reaction to Deuteronomy 20, the rabbinic tradition has produced 2 fundamental doctrines with respect to war. the concept of two kinds of war, and preemptive war. So in the Mishnah, in the book referred to as Sotah 8.7, the rabbinic commentary is that there exist two different types of war: voluntary war and obligatory wars. So a voluntary war refers to conflicts where the Israelites are the aggressors, and therefore it is purely voluntary. And in order to wage war, an enemy nation must have violated one of the Noahide commandments. So Deuteronomy 20, according to the rabbis, is regarding a voluntary war, where the Israelites are the aggressors, and therefore it is purely voluntary. But then there are obligatory wars, which are conflicts where the Israelites are defending the homeland against aggressors. So all Israelites have a duty to fight. So whenever the Israelites are aggressors, a war is voluntary. But whenever it is in self-defense, it is considered to be obligatory, and all men have to fight. Now, what has also been developed in rabbinic literature is this concept of the preemptive war. So as the contemporary rabbi Samuel David Luzzatto says, when you go forth to battle against your enemy, Scripture indicates that we should only make war against our enemies. The term enemy refers only to one who seeks to harm us, so Scripture is speaking only of an invader who would enter our territory to take our land and despoil us. In other words, if an enemy is about to invade the homeland, it is taught in the rabbinic tradition that you are to strike them first. So do not allow them to invade you, but rather before they even invade, strike them first and end the conflict before it gets bad. And we can see this teaching is also evident in the Talmud. If someone comes to kill you, kill him first. So the rabbinic tradition does teach this concept of preemptive war, that if someone is coming to get you, you get them first. You initiate the first blow. Now, right now, it probably seems that the Jewish tradition is quite militant, with respect to its teachings on war. And yet, we also have this commentary from Nachmanides, who warns against the evils of war. And he writes, Scripture warns us to be especially careful at times when sin is common. It is well known that when groups go to war, they eat every abominable thing, steal, do violence, and are not ashamed even to commit adultery and other detestable things, so that even the most naturally upright of men is enveloped in violence and anger when setting off to battle against an enemy. Therefore Scripture warns, you shall guard yourself from every evil thing, for the Lord your God is in the midst of your camp. So war is an evil thing, and it is corrupting, and it even corrupts the most upright of men, so it should be avoided at all costs. Now, there is one important detail that I would like for us to be aware of. Although the Jewish tradition acknowledges that God sometimes sanctions war, God's ultimate goal is peace. And there is a famous selection from the book of Isaiah that expresses just this principle. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. So in other words, even though war is a reality now, in the days to come, that is, in the future, God will bring an end to war. And people will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and nation shall never lift sword against nation ever again. So in conclusion, the Torah does advocate a theology of just war. So there are times when God sanctions and even approves of war. However, there are certain rules that are to be followed in war as ordained by God, according to Deuteronomy 20. And although war is a reality of life, and it is even sanctioned by God in the present historical period, inevitably the ideal state is a place of peace, where the war does not exist. So the ultimate goal of God's plan is peace.